Hi, this is Paul. Don't know if I have a lot of time to make a video. Visited with Freddie today. He's doing a lot better. He's walking, he's eating. So, those of you who are praying for Freddie, yeah, things are going in a better direction at least. So that's good news. Luke had I thought, a terrific live stream this morning. A lot of good engagement, a lot of good talking. I'll just put the link below for that. That was really good. That was a competitor for making a video, because usually what happens, I try and get all my work done, or at least a good portion of my work done, and then another half hour I've got left in the day, just try and make a video so that there's something for homeroom. If the a lot of people skip the Randos conversations, but today's Rando, again, I thought it was really good, and I have to make a video about sort of what the status of those conversations are, because I just have to do some updating on that. I also finished The Pope Who Would Be King, which was a super interesting book on Pius the Ninth. A whole lot of history I didn't know about this revolt in the Papal States. A revolt for a whole bunch of it has a lot to do with the question of red Christian nationalism. So here you have rule by clerics, and it's hated, and it's just a fascinating period of history. And as one of the, they always have these little things in here that tries to say, well, David Kurtzer's brilliant treatment of the crisis of the papacy between 1846 and 1850 reads like a thriller, and it does. I'll often start books and go to another book and go to another book. I'm so ADHD, but once I got going in this book, boy, I was caught all the way through, and there's a whole bunch of videos that people send, oh, you got to watch this, got to watch this. No, I can't be bothered. I've got to get through this book. And many of these issues of what's the relationship between the church as institution and the state as institution, because in the Papal States, of course, they're the same thing. And basically the Pope has to flee Rome. He takes shelter first in Gaeta, which is a little bit south along the coast. But in the kingdom of Nepal, of Naples, kingdom of Nepal, that would really be fling. It's just so fascinating. He's trying to arrange these Catholic powers in Europe and France. Of course, by this time it's post French Revolution, and so you've got Charles. You've got the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte in the new Roman Senate, and you've got his cousin Louis, who becomes the president of France, and the French army comes in, and it's the whole story is just incredible. So I'll probably say more about that as we go. But the video that really won the prize today was this one, and it snuck in. Algo picked it up, and I do know very few people that are on this new class of drugs like Ozempic. And what's so interesting to me about these drugs is that part of the big Orthodox moment that has happened, Jonathan Peugeot will talk about, the passion. So Orthodoxy comes to America, and Orthodoxy is all about, well, we're going to restrain the passions. And basically what these drugs do is they restrain the passions, or at least the appetites. And because of these drugs, people are losing weight, people are not drinking as much. And then when that came through, I thought, oh, marriage and sex in the age of Ozempic, I thought, oh, I dare bet this is about a wife who no longer wants to have sex with her husband. And it is. This couple, they both went to high school in Sacramento, and they never really dated or anything, never really got going, and they both married other people, and then they both got divorced. And then there's this period when Facebook came online where there are all of these affairs that happened because people had gotten married and gotten divorced, or maybe didn't get divorced, and then they got onto Facebook and they discovered some of their old flames. And I'd heard stories about this, of people, having affairs and adulterous. Well, these two, they're both divorced. They connect on Facebook. They date, they fall in love, but she's got all these body image issues because she's always overweight, um and there's so many things that are going on with this video. One of it is just the level of disclosure, intimate disclosure. When I was on the podcast last week, I talked about the fact that the internet is sort of a real opportunity for pastors looking for sermon illustrations, because pastors often get good at sermon illustrations from the pastoral care work, but most of the good illustrations that you could use from your pastoral care work, you can't use because it's stuff shared in secret, even though you might know that these issues are just sort of in the congregation. You can't address them directly. I mean, because you can give up confidentiality, to do it in a cavalier way, you get in trouble. But people are just, spilling their stuff on the internet. So
the data show that 1 in 8 Americans has tried.
Which is astounding, because when I first started listening to this, I thought, this is a middle and upper class thing. And it probably still is. I don't think a lot of poor people are on Ozempic or this class of drugs, but 1 in 8, that's a big number.
One of these drugs, so that's a lot of millions of people, right? And so it's creating all kinds of conversations, not just about how we feel and our health.
And again, what's so interesting about this is, so one of the fun things about Orthodoxy coming to America is that if you, let's say, have a seminary education and like church history and had read perhaps church fathers all along the way, what Orthodoxy does is take a bunch of these older conversations and brings them to the fore. And that's really part of what's interesting about the Pope who would be king and these 19th and 20th century popes, because so many of these issues are just coming up to the fore. Now, if you read any Tom Holland, you'll know that these issues of secular versus ecclesiastical leadership and power and control, these issues have been alive throughout the history of Europe. But part of what happens in the 19th and 20th century is that basically the church just gets totally defeated with these issues. And, when you read the kinds of things that are going on in the Papal States, where in all fairness, I'm not trying to make this a Catholic Protestant thing. You've got parallels to this, let's say, in certain Puritan communities. So you've got all of these questions about privacy, personal liberty. What is a legitimate way for the church to wade into someone's decisions about their appetites? And we're in this moment right now where, as a result of a lot of the chaos that has sort of come through the culture because of the counterculture, we're in a moment right now when there's obviously sort of a conservative reaction to taking a part of what had been historic ways that the church really got involved in the intimate aspects of people's lives. But now we've got a pharmaceutical, and people are, of course, taking this voluntarily, but often they're taking it. The reason you're getting a script for this is because, let's say you've tried to lose weight and now suddenly you're getting older in life, you're getting into your 50s and 60s, and your doctor is increasingly going to be concerned about your blood pressure, going to be concerned about type 2 diabetes, all these kinds of issues. So also sleep apnea. So suddenly now it's a medical thing. Whereas, let's say for the Pope, these issues were about condemnation and salvation and eternity, and at least for Roman Catholics, I suppose, years in purgatory. Americans aren't worried about that, but they're worried about their health.
But also how we look and how that matters in the world. Like, I have a friend who takes the medicine, and he says, if you are able to eat just 5 French fries,
Mm-hmm.
and you used to not be able to eat just 5 French fries and had to eat the whole plate of French fries, it gives you grounding in the idea that you can control things in your life that you didn't think you could control.
So in some ways, Ozempic is kind of analogous to psychedelics. What if I could obtain the results of what would have been a lot of spiritual effort, a lot of mortification, a lot of spiritual disciplines by curbing my passions and desires? What if I can get it in a drug? And now the funny thing though about, and this is something that sort of in this Orthodox moment when the children of adults who were sort of liberated by the culture have issues because the consequence of parents' liberation was chaos and turmoil in the lives of the children. Okay, but at the same time, what if, I remember talking to a really smart guy who's a Christian Reformed guy who was a biochemist, and he was on a board that I was serving on. And so we were at this board meeting. We're both from out of town. And so, we're taking these little vans here and there. And so I just stuck up a relationship with him and began kind of a friendship with him. And so we're talking about drugs. And so we had a Randos show up in Sacramento today. He'd showed up before, and I wasn't in town, but he showed up again, and he contacted me, and we went out to lunch. And I told him, I said, I like to meet people because I like to ask about their lives, and it's everything that I do in the Randos conversations. I like to hear about their work and all that. And he was talking about drugs, and he was saying, basically drugs, street drugs, but a lot of drugs, they either bring you up or they bring you down. And people who are, let's say, a little out of control and they want to settle down and they need to sleep, this is how entertainers often get hooked on drugs, because it's such an adrenaline rush to be performing in front of thousands of people and having them cheer you on. And then the concert ends at 11 or 12, and you're going to have to somehow get some sleep because you're going to have to travel, and you're going to have another show maybe in the same city or another city. So you'd have to take downers. So they take drugs to relax and to sleep. But then they got to get up in the morning, they've got to work. So then they take uppers. And people do this sort of normally. Let's say often they'll drink wine at night to go to sleep, and they'll drink caffeine in the morning to wake up. That's sort of a low level thing. But if you're at the level of, performing in front of thousands of people, a little bit of wine isn't going to bring you down. You're probably going to do harder stuff. So it's interesting that on one hand, we certainly want self-control and we don't want the passions running amok in our life, but you also don't want to have zero passion, because there's actually 7 deadly sins on kind of both sides of this. And sloth is a deadly sin. So it's super interesting to have sort of this drug to take away my passions. Well, how's that going to go with these two?
So if you're a person who was completely helpless in the face of a plate of French fries, and suddenly you get control of that, what else can you control? Control the way you relate to your children, the way you talk to your boss. So my question was, if your body has changed so much, just the shell you walk around in, and
Just the shell you walk around in. Oh, that's what our bodies are?
mindset has changed so much about what's possible for you, wouldn't that affect the way you relate to everything and everyone in your life, including your most intimate relationships?
Okay, so I don't have the time to sort of go through this whole thing. The link is below. So far, I've had good success with New York Times things on YouTube. They haven't given me content strikes or demonetized or any of those things that things can, but I want to jump ahead.
Eating that much, And
I feel for the first time in my life like this may be it. Like I may be able to keep this weight off because I've addressed the food noise.
the food noise that had been tormenting her is gone. She feels like it's like a miracle, really.
Wow. So this is just a really dramatic, very quick shift.
Yes. I mean, she lost 60 pounds inside of 8 months. And then, she notices that like people start treating her differently.
Yeah. So flying home on a trip, work trip, and I was in the window seat. And
She told me this story about she travels a lot for work. And she was on a flight home from Chicago and she was sitting in the window seat.
And a guy sat in the middle seat and said, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm sitting next to a small person." He said, sometimes you're in the middle seat and you're crowded between two big people and it's really uncomfortable. And so on the one hand, I'm like, yay, I'm a small person. But on the other hand, really pissed off because when people looked at me before or sat next to me on the plane before, were they thinking these things the whole time where I'm trying to have a nice conversation and all that's in their head is I'm stuck next to this fat person?
She was so furious on behalf of her bigger self.
It's like in this moment, she's almost caught between her old self and her new self.
She's defending her old self as she's like happy for her new self. It's really...
And of course, all this language of old self and new self, this is all New Testament language that we have of transformations, of conversion, and
unbelievable moment of transformation.
Well, and even at work.
At work, she felt this way. She's a successful professional. She's always been a successful professional.
But I feel like the marketing team is putting me out there more.
And now, suddenly at work, she's getting these outward-facing opportunities where she's being put forward as a talking head to talk to the media, for example, or she's being put forward to talk to the board in a way that she hadn't been before.
But I feel like there's this different perception of me. I'm the same person. I'm just 60 pounds lighter.
Now, this is a thing that others have said, too, about these.
Now, I'm the same person. I'm 65 pounds lighter. But you're not the same person because other things are starting to change. Okay, so part of her... This is also a good one in terms of just talking about marriage, because I've made the point numerous times that marriage is actually difficult to talk about on the internet because if you're doing what I'm doing right now, this is not AI. This is far from AI. And you can't talk about it's the same problem with pastoral care stuff. You can't talk about certain things because talking about it will impact and quite possibly negatively an actual marriage or an actual family. But there are these patterns that go through. And so you often change names, and these two are using their middle names. They no longer live in Sacramento and all this kind of thing. And maybe they even switch the town. Who knows? And that's absolutely fine. But she's now undergoing a pretty significant transformation. And I remember Lou Smedes in his memoir, he said, it was in his memoir, it was just one of these. Lou Smedes was a notable scholar in the Christian Reformed Church, taught at Calvin College, and then eventually taught at Fuller Seminary. And he said, my wife has been married to 5 different men, and all of them are me. One of the things that happens in a marriage long term is that people undergo transformations in their life. They change. And this is a significant transformation. And part of what couples have rituals and routines that they do that strengthen the marriage. So one of the things that my wife and I like to do is car trips. We like to do car trips together. And we, and so there's all of these fairly mundane daily things that couples do together that sort of strengthen the relationship. And then there are often other things that couples bump into that weaken the relationship. And so relationships are a combination of both those kinds of things. And so what these two did is they like to play board games, and they go over to friends' board games, friends' houses, and play board games. And they would just go all through the night playing this board games. They'd be drinking and they'd be eating, and it was a big part of their relationship. But now she's taking this drug that's curbing her passions, and what it's also doing. See, then there's this complex dynamic where she always felt insecure about her weight. She never felt like she had the capital, either socially or in her marriage, to assert her other desires. So on one hand, some of these desires are being curbed, but because she now has greater status, because now she's attractive, she can see the status at work, people are giving her more status, or her status, her stock has gone up. And so now she's got the boldness to tell her husband, maybe I don't want to spend all night at one of these games. Maybe I want to go home and curl up with a book and go to sleep.
Just that her appetite for that kind of life, where you're going out and you're hanging with friends and you're staying up late and everybody's drinking, those appetites, they had limits as well.
I would have liked to get home earlier before anyway. And now I can say, I'm not drinking. I would like to be home.
In fact, she had an introverted side that hadn't been able to express herself because she was so busy being a pleaser extrovert because she was in a bigger body and she wanted people to like her.
I am not as much of a night owl as my husband is. And I like to read my Kindle a little bit before I go to sleep at night. Yeah. And I just don't do well the next day if I'm out really late.
Once she was in a smaller body, she could assert herself and say, actually, I like being at home.
But she's also...
Now, part of what's really interesting about this video is that we have these value structures and narratives in our culture that sort of promote certain things, and these values can be in tension with other values. And so immediately when I saw the title, I thought, oh, somebody's sex drive went down. And we'll get to that. But what's also interesting is, so culturally, as a culture, we really value recreational sex as a culture. We really do. And that gets expressed in all kinds of different ways culturally. We really value sort of fruitless sex, and we really value sexual expression. And so there's a bit of an interesting dilemma that happens when people are now getting those new, their body issues are getting resolved, and they're looking skinnier, and their stock is rising in the sexual marketplace because they're skinnier. But what if they don't want to have sex anymore when they're skinny, and other people want to have sex with them? So how does that work? And now we have some of these liberationist values that are coming through. I'm more assertive now with my husband, and I don't want to spend so much time over at the neighbor's house drinking and playing games anymore. I want to come home at a different hour. And again, these kinds of things in a marriage, marriages are full of changes and negotiations and compromises. Actually, Luke, at the beginning of his live stream, his little monologue section, I mean, he was talking about some of those kinds of things, that life is full of these kinds of negotiations.
Her body, she could assert herself and say, actually, I like being at home.
But she's also telling Javier she doesn't want to do the things that he thought that she loved.
And that they loved together.
They loved together, right.
That was like the fabric of the fun that they had always had together.
How does he respond to all this?
He does not like it.
No, I like going with the flow. I mean, living in the moment and enjoying, whatever's going on in social aspects or social.
Now, again, they're both on their second marriage. And that's important too, because on one hand, divorce is a tricky thing, because sometimes people get out of a marriage and the marriage is bad, and there's this liberation, but there's also this sense of, I'm a loser couldn't keep the marriage together. And if a second marriage goes under, especially a marriage that seemed to be going well, and so then again, you have these competing values in American culture about, well, do we want people just breaking up and disposing of a partner? I mean, the entire institution of marriage is, again, part of the national conversation. And, well, now it's going to get into sex.
It was a conversation, and and now it's a fight, and one of us is going to walk away angry because we're not seeing eye to eye on something.
And their fights could be loud and ugly.
So I started really wondering who I was with. I mean, this person that I've been with for better part of 15 years really started to take a change. Maybe
Javier said to me, we go from 0 to 60 in like seconds.
Bottom line is, it became very confusing to me as far as how to manage our relationship. I would even comment to her. I'd say, I don't recognize you. I need a roadmap. I need a roadmap to figure out, what's within bounds and what's out of bounds. I don't feel like I can be myself with you the way I used to be, because I don't want to offend you, or I don't want to make you feel badly, because things.
So he's walking on eggs because she's a different person. She's a different person from who he married, and he's trying to figure that out. Now, a big part of this, so societally, in her perception, I'm not saying it isn't true, her stock was rising because she was now skinny, and she was now sort of aligning up with these cultural beauty standards. But here's a funny thing about beauty standards is that there are cultural beauty standards, and they're certainly cross-cultural beauty standards. I'm not saying there isn't, but I'll tell you, I've lived in different countries, and I've lived in among different ethnic groups. And for example, in the Dominican Republic, I remember a woman who I thought she was a very attractive woman, but she was quite slender. And she said, flaquita, flaquita. She's so skinny. Because in the Dominican Republic, they much more liked the curves. And it would be very interesting when you'd have a work team come down, because you'd have women, the young women coming down with a work team who in Canada or the United States were seen as being very attractive, and they got a lot of male attention. And then you get other women, usually heavier set, more weight on them. They had a story like hers where they didn't get a lot of attention in terms of from men. And then they'd go down to the Dominican Republic, and now the skinnier women that were very attractive in North America weren't getting the kind of attention that they were looking for necessarily. But women are very in tune to these kinds of things, as are men. But it was the women who were heavier that started getting the kind of attention from Dominican men that they just weren't used to. And they kind of liked it. But what if you're on the opposite side of this?
Really missed it. And he missed her, and he missed her body.
I used to love feeling her body, her big body, next to me in bed. The softness of her body, the extra tummy and the extra booty, next to
They
me.
both talk about the loss of her butt. Are there things you miss about your previous body?
My butt.
They both loved her butt, right?
So I miss that voluptuousness. And that was an attraction early on in our relationship, to me anyways. Being able to lean up next to her and feel her, lack of a better word, draping over me or onto me. That's no longer an option. Now it's cuddling, and it's cuddling as tight and closely as we can, or as I can. And that's the extent of the intimacy. I'm at a loss for why.
So once she went on this pill, basically, there's no more sex between them.
There's no physical intimacy, or hasn't been any.
This like physical connection that they had has completely changed into something else. And neither one of them.
So now again, things get very interesting because you've got these religious traditions. And we did a video. I did a video with Sam and Laura on why is the church today sex positive when the ancient church was so sex negative. And then, in fact, we had a live stream where we had even more voices in on this, which, and I'll put the links below to these two videos. And, you know, recently, this continues in church history because, you know, there's this, one of the best randos I'd ever done. I did this conversation with Anne, and one of the best, and someone recently mentioned this video, and he said, there's a video on your channel where this woman is talking about her father, who her father divorced her mother and they're Catholic. And then he remarried and he had a Josephite marriage with his second wife so that he could take the Eucharist. It's just what a conversation. Anne is wonderful. Anne came to the Catholic event that we had in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. But there's all these issues in the church, obviously, around sex and all these traditions. You know, I can't find the video, but Algo served it up. It's from this channel, the Happy Wife School, which this is such an interesting battleground. Basically, the video was about, why are you so selfish not to give your husband a hand job or a blow job? I mean, come on, ladies, have a little mercy on the guy. And to me, it was so funny in comparison to some of these Orthodox videos that are out there where they're sort of bringing this ancient sex negativity into the conversation. And so we're having this clash of all of these different ideas right now.
But for you, the voluptuousness was erotic.
It was erotic. It was comforting. It was nice. It was, sensual. And that's no longer the case. And this new body, I haven't really been able to touch or explore or anything like that.
It's not as accessible.
It's not. No.
Was that just another appetite that the drugs reduced?
I mean, that's what Javier's theory is maybe. There's some evidence that these medications decrease sex drive, but there's more that they increase it. And
again, I found that so interesting because these are human beings. And that's what's part of why this video was good, in that this isn't just going to be about sort of biochemistry in a person, although that's a level that's there. This is going to be about all kinds of other issues.
Jean has different theories of the case. She's gone through menopause. She's been on antidepressants for a really long time. And both of those things are known to suppress sex drive. But I think there's actually something bigger at work here.
I haven't said this to him. I just didn't say no.
You haven't said it to him, but you're telling this reporter who's going to put it on a podcast for the New York Times. Okay.
Before.
She started to be able to draw boundaries between doing things for other people because they want them and being able to articulate what she wants. And she doesn't want to have sex. And she's saying so in her marriage to her husband.
I'm setting the boundaries. I don't want to have sex, but before I would.
No, actually, she's not saying so. Actually, she's just acting it out. And not saying so sort of means she's not really taking ownership of it either. And I mean, oh, marriage and sex, it's so, it's complicated stuff.
Because I felt like it was my responsibility.
That is empowering for her in some way.
God, I can totally see.
So now we have these different values, and these values are relating in an economy. So on one hand, America is very sex positive. Oh, you should be having outrageously great sex. But if it's empowering to say no to sex, well, that's empowering up there too. So you have all these different values and they're in tension with each other. And then you've got the chemical side.
Why making an intense physical and emotional change could lead somebody like Jean to need to, if nothing else, take a break from having sex. But I can imagine if you are the person's partner, that suddenly finding out that like the person that you shared a really active, pleasing sex life with doesn't want it or doesn't like it, I can imagine that that's totally devastating. Did she tell him that that's how she felt?
I mean, he could tell, but he very much...
The answer was no, okay? The answer was no. She did not tell him. It's so interesting, the subtleties of, did she tell him? Well, he could find, why don't you just say, why can't you answer that question?
Wants to be her loving partner.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean in the context of like not having sex when you want sex?
Well, they were both working on this in therapy, individually and together.
For example, we discussed with my therapist, and she provided a link that has to do with intimate touch.
And Javier's therapist gave him an exercise.
So the therapist gives him an exercise, and you can listen to the video and hear it. And basically, they do it once, and he's like, "Oh, this is good. This is kind of," and she's like, "No, I'm not going to do this again." There's in a previous video, maybe I can find the links to it. There's a lot of research out there on this kind of thing with couples, as you would imagine there is. And I mean, one part of it is that in monogamous relationships, women's often, not always, because with almost all of these things, it's not always. We have all of these stereotypes, and there's usually some truth behind the stereotypes, but there's also plenty of exceptions. So, in a marriage, long term, generally speaking, I'd posted to another video, these articles that were in Substack from some marriage therapist on Substack was like, what men think about, what men assume women think about sex is wrong, and then the other way too. And I thought they were good articles, but so these two are just sort of out there. And I was so wondering where this piece was going to land, because not only are there all these unspoken value judgments that every culture is just full of value hierarchies. They just are. That's what makes up a culture. And many of them are sort of unspoken, because often to speak these things changes them. And again, that's why it's so hard to talk about marriage struggles. Well, so all of these value hierarchies are unspoken, and people engage with them at different levels. So, body image, he liked his wife a little heavier, and now she wasn't there. He liked his wife a little more accessible. Now because her stock has risen, because that is part of what goes on in a stressed marriage. People aren't just asking the question, do I want to stay with this partner? They're also at subtle levels asking themselves, can I get a better deal? What if we split? Am I a loser again? I mean, there's just lots of little questions beneath the surface that they're probably not consciously processing, but they are processing. And so her stock has risen. She feels a little bit more empowered. So now she's able to say no to him. He's probably, he's older. He's probably put on some weight too. What happens if he goes on the Ozempic and now he starts losing weight and he goes to the gym and he starts getting attention, and that can go lots of different ways. But I was really curious with this. How's this going to land? Are they going to stay together? And then basically they tried to give it a sort of a soft landing where, well, they're doing better. And it was so interesting too. They're learning to be flexible. Oh, okay. You mean like no, not in bed. They're learning to be flexible with each other. And truth be told, that's what it takes in a marriage, because the commitment to the marriage is also in an economy of value hierarchies. And that's where, I forget, I think it was on the live stream, and someone had Googled and said, evangelical ministers have a 10% divorce rate instead of like a 45% divorce rate, something like that. And so your values will be in there. And again, what was so amazing, again, so this woman, this happy wife school, I think she's a conservative evangelical. And there's room for all that on the internet. Anne's father was a Roman Catholic that dearly desired for the last years of his life to be in alignment and be faithful to the church. And it sounds like his wife agreed to that. Suppose this wife wouldn't have any problem with it either, which is where even just sort of framing Christianity in terms of, well, I can measure my Christianity by where I am in terms of my desires. This gets into the monastic conversation. So you zero out all of your desires. Does that make you a good Christian? And the truth is, where all of us have different temptations. And some people who don't have, let's say, the normal temptations for overeating or over drinking or sexual license or some of those, they can be astoundingly self-righteous, which is basically pride. So, I don't know. The whole thing was just super interesting. And I have no idea how this video is going to land. And I'm trying to think about some really fun clickbaity titles for this video. And I'm really looking forward to the comment section. So leave a comment.